guys, I know a great many of you in here, and some of you are unfamiliar faces, but my name is Kenny Sivard. I'm president of the McCurtain County Historical Society, and I serve on the board of directors of the Oklahoma Historical Society. I began researching in earnest McCurtain County history when I was a very young teenager, and began that search, that lifelong quest of history right here at Wheelock Academy with Barbara Grant and Lewis Coleman, both of which I was very fortunate to have as mentors of mine, as a fledgling historian. And so this is a very unique and great opportunity for me to be able to come here to this great place of history and be able to even cover the surface material and the awesome history that this place represents. So I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Tvshkahomma Nation and more specifically to the Wheelock Historic Site and the staff thereof. Miss Wanda and Don both are fantastic stewards of this site and of this history and the story side of this place, and I thank them very much for the work that they're putting in and the innovative ways that they are undertaking in order to be able to share this history with not only the tribal community but with the world. And so I thank you always for the opportunity to be here, and I thank you for always championing this site's history. So, got a lot of ground to cover, a very short time to do so, and I don't want to make a hostage situation, so we're going to be covering this thing with broad strokes tonight, because the problem with this program is that it isn't that there's so little to talk about, but that there is so much to talk about and to cover. This place, this church and this mission is truly unique, not just in our tribal history or our state history, but in American history. There is no other place like it, and there's certainly no other place like it still standing, such as this church here. Of course, most of you will know that you're sitting inside the oldest standing church building in the state of Oklahoma. And this is a rare opportunity that not a lot of people have, or a lot of people don't have that often at the very least. And so to begin to summarize the history of this place, I'm going to start with telling you first the stories of two people, Alfred and Harriet Bunce Wright. Alfred Wright handed out earlier with the assistance of these young ladies here a picture. And by the way, I want to thank Dawn for bringing these off. Last time I spoke at the event out here, she printed me off some material that I had sent her just maybe 4 hours prior to the event. Well, today was no exception, except 3 times the work. So kudos to Dawn for getting it done and dealing with my procrastinations and all that. I appreciate it very much. So if you see the picture of the man there, is a sketch of the man there, that is Alfred Wright. Alfred Wright was born in 1788 in Columbia, Connecticut. He was born to an upper middle class family, one of several kids. I can't remember the exact number of children that the Wrights had. He attended Williams College and then attended Andover Seminary and was ordained a Presbyterian minister in Charleston in 1819. Now, while in Charleston, he meets a young lady. Her name was Harriet Bunce. Harriet was born to a wealthy family in Connecticut, and but was orphaned at a very young age, somewhere around 6 to 7 years old. She was orphaned by the death of both her parents, and she spent part of her childhood in a Presbyterian home for orphan girls. Now, this, of course, has a profound impact on the way she sees the function of the church and the mission that she and her husband would later found here at Wheelock. Harriet later on goes to live with a sister in Charleston. Her sister was married to a wealthy doctor. While she's living with her sister, she actually receives some layman's training and medical procedures and the practice of medicine that was understood in that day. In addition to that, her sister and her brother-in-law were also very active in their Presbyterian congregation. Alfred, after his ordaining as a Presbyterian minister, within a couple of months, in 1820, he takes on the charge to establish a mission for the American Board of Missions in Mississippi. He establishes a school and a church mission that he called Mayhew Mission in Mississippi. It's not until 1825 that he and Harriet married one another. Upon marrying, so that he's been in the ministry in Mississippi among the Choctaws and the old Choctaw Nation for 5 years by the time the two married. He brings her from Charleston. They then begin their life in Goshen, Mississippi. But in 1831, by 1831, so by the time they've been married 6 years, he has what is described as a heart element. And through researching and trying to figure out exactly what is this heart element, because he lived for several years with it, and it's a recurring thing that comes on to him. He would he would be very lethargic, he wouldn't have a lot of energy, he'd be confined to his bed for days, he would black out when he would bend over or picked up something heavy. It affected his vision, and I'm not sure that he didn't have maybe some symptoms of diabetes, but of course which was not diagnosed at that time. Later on, it affects his vision profoundly. He really goes blind by the time he passes away. But so in 1831, this element comes on. He comes on really strong. He's suffering from a lot of different symptoms. He and his wife, Harriet, they go up to the East Coast. They go up and down the East Coast the whole year trying to get medical treatment for Alfred. And during all this time, of course, what's happening in the Choctaw Nation? The Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek has been signed. Prior to that, the Treaty of Doak Stand had been signed. The Western movement of the Choctaws and the Choctaw removal and also known as the Trail of Tears, it's already coming into motion. Harriet and Alfred had already decided that they were going to migrate with the Choctaws to the new lands west of Mississippi, to here. And so in 1831, he has this medical bout. He goes into a depression. He's wondering if he can even come out here to the west and continue his mission work. He knows that once the Choctaws get to the west, they're going to need churches, schools, medical attention, things like that. That's what he sees as his mission field. That's his mindset. So he and Harriet returned to Goshen, Mississippi in late 1831. And in January of 1832, they make the commitment. They're going to move to the new Choctaw Nation in the west, what we know as the Choctaw Nation today. And so in January of 1832, they set out overland to Vicksburg, Mississippi. They get there. He's stricken with his heart ailment again. They are stranded there for 3 weeks. The party that they came with moves on without him. They get on a boat. They go by boat up the Mississippi River, up the Arkansas River, to Little Rock, Arkansas. There he's stricken with it again. For 6 months, they're stranded in Little Rock, Arkansas. No income. Waiting, living off of charity and off of the Presbyterian congregations there in Little Rock, and off the kindness of friends. 6 months down the road, Alfred gets up on his feet and he feels that he can make the trip the rest of the way. They go overland from Little Rock down the 4,000 military road from Little Rock to Washington, Arkansas, to Ultimathule, Arkansas, into the Choctaw Nation, arriving at Eagletown, or more specifically at the Beth Barr Mission that was ran by a man named Warren S. Williams at the site of Old Eagletown on the west bank of the Mountain Fork River at the military road crossing of Mountain Fork. And there was a mission that, like I said, was ran by Lauren S. Williams. Later, Williams establishes there the Eagletown Post Office, but it served as a jumping off point for many missionaries who were coming into the area because it was the first mission that they would encounter when they were entering the Indian Territory. Later on, Cyrus Vallington comes to the same mission and establishes Stockbridge, which is a short distance to the east. And that would become the first mission he would encounter when approaching into the Choctaw Nation. The Wrights stay there with Loring S. Williams for a short time, trying to decide where they're going to plant this mission. There were some big factors in why they chose this site. Number one, it's on the Fort Townsend to Little Rock Military Road. Ultimately, the road goes all the way to Memphis, Tennessee. So it is the major east-west road at the time. At the time, there was no riverboat travel available on Red River because of a massive log jam that wouldn't be cleared for another 5 years. And so the river travel wasn't quite as important at that time. All goods were going to be moved on this road. It ran right here on the north side of this building. It goes right down here, and we pick it up again over here by the cemetery. And so that was a huge factor. They could have planted anywhere on the military road if that was his want, his goal. Another reason is because in those woods back there is a spring, a good spring. It's a good source of water. That primary thing you're going to look at when you're looking at planning not just a mission, but a home in this new country. The other major factor was that in 1832, a Choctaw District chief named Thomas LaFleur had left Mississippi with a party of approximately 600 individuals bound for this territory. His destination, they knew, was the home that was built for the district chief of the Potawatomi district per the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek. That home, set approximately a mile straight west of us, was built by the U.S. government prior to the Choctaws migrating into this territory. So Alfred and Harriet Wright had the knowledge that approximately 600 people would be settling in this immediate vicinity. Now, of course, when they got here, they dispersed from this area. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute because it comes to play in Alfred Wright's ministry. And there are still continuing portions of the ministry that blossomed out of this mission. Still today. And so those were all major factors in why this site was chosen. Number one, you had transportation. Number two, you had good, clean water. And number three, you had people. You had people who would be here that you could serve. Now, Alan Wright, who went on to become chief of the Choctaw Nation, and I'll talk more about him here in a little while, but he recorded that between 1832 and 1853, that over 600 people joined this church. And so it was a very blossoming congregation. Alfred and Harriet, when they come here, the very first church services that were held on these grounds is held just north of us here, and on December 9th, 1832. The very first church services of the Wheelock Mission are held on the grounds immediately north of us. They built a small log home for them to live in, which they also taught a day school out of in the beginning. They built a brush arbor in which they held church meetings and Sunday school in on the grounds here. Later on, they built more buildings, and as the Wheelock Mission grows and expands, well, so of course does the footprint of the mission, the physical footprint of the mission. Alfred knew when he came here that he wanted to build a standing church. And to give you an idea of his mindset about his mission work here and the work that he would go on to do, we have two writings from this time when he came here. One is in his journal where he says that God has taken me from the edge of the grave, and here I am determined to do God's work. Referring to the mission work. And another, he wrote a letter to a friend back in Connecticut, and he stated that, let me think here so I don't paraphrase, that God has saved me from death, and here I raise my Ebenezer because God has blessed me thus far. And so when he erects this church, and he and the community, surrounding community, raised this church. Of course, if you go around back here, between this tree and the church, and you look up at the very top, there's a small stone that says Jehovah Jireh, God's with us. That was his attitude into this mission. And that's the physical evidence that he left behind, writing about this mission, and of course, when he erected this church. The construction of this church is very interesting. As you know, if you grew up here, there's no other buildings like it in this part of the state. None like it whatsoever at all. You know, I always wondered how in the world they got these stones to where they got. How did they raise these stones? Well, Alfred Wright
for 50 years.
Alfred Wright left us a clue. And he talks about this device in which it has a pivot in the middle. And on here there's a sling, and you place a stone in it. And back here there's a larger sling. And you keep placing stones in this sling until it lifts this one up. And then you can move it on that pivot. And put that stone into place, or at least hand it to workmen who had scaffolding around the building. And that's how they placed the rocks where they were to be placed. The craftsmanship is unbelievable, as you know. This interior is not the original 1840s interior. Burned. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But you know, when we talk about when this church was built, people always slap 1846 on it because that's what it says on the Jehovah Jireh stone. However, the construction really began, the footprint of this building begins in 1844, late 1844. They continued construction through 1845. It's dedicated in 1846, but it's not used until 1847. And so it's a continuing project that spanned over a 3-year period. And no telling how much time went into work. I wish I could uncover what more help he had. It's recorded that he had workmen from the area help, that people from the community helped in constructing this building. So, Choctaw residents helped build this building, there's not a doubt. But I wish I knew what consultant he had, because there's no record that he ever took any kind of architectural or engineering classes to know to understand the things like weights and pitches and everything else on this building. I wish we knew more. Wish we knew more about it. But it is, you know, it withstands as a monument to history here in southeast Oklahoma, and it's a terrifically wonderful structure. Like I said, there's none other like it in the state. So, blossoming out of this mission, all through the 1830s through the 1840s, Alfred and Harry wanted to, one of their primary goals with this mission was education. And so they worked about translating, and also the Christian side of the mission, the religious side of the mission. They worked about translating several books into the Choctaw language, primarily beginning with the Bible. In the Old Testament books, Harriet and Alfred Wright worked on a great deal. They were aided in that by Choctaw residents of the area. Alfred Wright and Harry Wright, they get a lot of credit with getting it translated and getting it into writing, but they did so with the help of Choctaw residents of the area. One Choctaw resident that we know that helped with the translation was a man named Joseph Dukes, and we'll talk about him a little bit later too. They translated books of the Bible. They wrote Choctaw grammar books, Choctaw arithmetic books. They set about with other missionaries in securing monies in order to be able to get those books published at publishing houses in the Northeast. And those books shipped back, brought back into the Choctaw Nation and dispersed through the Choctaw Nation's National Education Program and through the American Board of Missions. They wrote Choctaw hymns, the most famous of which being which is Choctaw hymn number 48, the most widely known and sung and memorized Choctaw hymn of the entire Choctaw hymn book, one of the most sacred songs among the Native American churches in southeast Oklahoma, that was written right here on the site by Alfred Wright with the assistance Choctaw translators. Those books, those writings, those translations, those are things that continue on for the rest of Alfred Wright's life and his and Harriet's lives together. Alfred goes on to expand the mission to include preaching stops at Mount Zion, which is not Mount Zion near Valley. I know we often think it's Flatlanders. Mount Zion and Valley. I'm talking about Mount Zion near the Noah community, near Pickens, up in that area. He also went on to establish a preaching stop at Hottaby, known as Big Lick. Hottaby later becomes Smithfield, modern day Smithfield. So far and wide, he passed out this missionary reach. And why I said that his mission is still alive in a sense earlier is because even though it's waning and its membership is declining, the congregation of Big Lick Presbyterian still holds regular church programming, including Sunday school classes. That's a continuation of a congregation that was established by Alfred Wright. Now, why was he at Big Lick? Why was he at Mount Zion? Why of all places did he pick there? Was it because it's remote? Yes, it's very remote. Is it because people were there? Yes, people were there, obviously. Hottaby was connected with Fort Smith. It was on Fort Smith to Fort Townsend Military Road. It cut right through the middle of Hottaby community, right across the yard of Big Lick Presbyterian Church. And by the way, Big Lick, the reason why it's called that is there's a big natural salt lick behind the church on the warehouse around there that existed. But the reason why he did that is because the people who went and established those communities are from those 600 original immigrants that came with the Thomas LaFleur Party. So he served those people here, and he followed them into the mountains. And so he would do this big circuit riding deal and go up there and preach every one. Later, sometimes it was once every 2 months, but usually every 1 month. He would go up there and hold communion and give church service in those areas. I mentioned that his wife received mediocre medical training. And now when I say mediocre, she was a lifesaver in her day because the first recorded licensed physician or accredited licensed physician that we have in what is now McCurtain County was Dr. Howe, who was a brother-in-law of Peter Bixby. He died in 1860. The next accredited physician to settle on what is now McCurtain County was Dr. Dennison, who doesn't come until 1899, 1900. And so missionaries like Cyrus Byington was famously known for providing medical care to his congregants and to people of the area, even though he was not a licensed physician. Same way with Harriet Wright. She provided medical care to residents of the area. They established a day school in 1833 here on the grounds of this mission, directly to the north of us. Later on, that becomes a school that offers boarding. There were several children that boarded with the Wrights, and indeed the Wrights, when I say adopted, they didn't adopt them in the sense that we think of today. They didn't go to a court and they're awarded this child, and the child changes his name, so on and so forth. It wasn't this legally binding thing. But they took under their wing, and by all intents and purposes, adopted several children that they raised over the course of years. The most famous of which is the one I mentioned earlier, Choctaw Chief Allen Wright, who takes his last name from Alfred and Harriet Wright. Allen Wright had come here as a child to the Luke Fodder community. His parents passed away. He was raised in part by a sister who then brought him here to Wheelock. And they nurtured him and educated him, made sure that he obtained an education, lobbied for him to further his education through the Choctaw Nation's programs. And he did so. He became an ordained Presbyterian minister. He became a lawyer, schooled in the law of the Choctaw Nation. He became a leading man of the tribe for decades. And he guided the Choctaw Nation through the post-Civil War period, being elected a Choctaw chief in 1865. And the election immediately after 1865, served in 66, 67, and went to 68. 70. And goes on in his documented history for being the man who named this state in a convention to where the United States of America was trying to combine all the Indian nations together in one common territory as a consequence of their alliance with the Confederacy during the Civil War's governance. He made the suggestion that if they did so, that they named this new territory Oklahoma. When you read it, that name sticks all the way down to 1907 when it's thrown out again and named the state of Oklahoma. As a man who got his root right here on these grounds, right here, sat in these four walls. And to me, that's just an amazing thing. You reach out and touch it. It's right here among us. So many times we read about these people like there's some kind of fairy tale or legend or something like that. These are real people. They belong to you, they belong to me, they belong to all of us. All part of our story. All interconnected to their lives. Alfred Wright lives until he passed away actually on this day in 1853. He was born on March 1st. He passed away on March 31st, 1853, with his long afflicted heart ailment. Buried right across the road over here. Large marble slab marks his grave, his final resting place, and portion is busted into at least 3 different pieces. Love to see it restored one day. It's going to take a lot of work because the foundation is off underneath it. It really needs to be done. Really needs to be done. Miss Wright remains here for 2 more years, and then she moves to Madison, Florida. Lives out the rest of her life, and she passes away in 1863. The time she passed away, the entire nation was in turmoil. The Choctaw Nation was no exception. It had been pulled into the gravitational pull of the American Civil War. Which is another reason why this building, this mission, this congregation was so unique. I mentioned a man earlier, Joseph Dukes. He was a member, active, devoted member of this church. Sat in these 4 walls. In 1860, he runs for the office of Principal Chief of the Choctaw Nation, which was a new office, provided by a new constitution. He runs against some other men, but primarily a man named George Hudson. George Hudson wins that election. Gilbert Dukes, one of the reasons that he ran, and one of the big campaign promises he gave, is that if he were elected Principal Chief of the Choctaw Nation, he would abolish the practice of slavery in the Choctaw Nation. A monumental thing at its time. You go on to find that there was another reverend operating here, because this is sometime after the death of Reverend Wright. Reverend Edwards, when he was in operation of this church, he was an outspoken abolitionist. And in researching, indeed, there was a small abolitionist movement that came out of the congregation of this church. Now, there are some other churches that had likewise movements near Scullyville, but it is truly unique in the Indian nations to have such a congregation, and very unique, holds a very unique place in state history. The abolitionist movement operated in these four walls. And I can go on, I can tell you, I could write you a book on that if you wanted to hear, but I'll spare you all that tonight. So that's another unique place that this church and this mission holds in our state and national history. Abolitionist movement in the Indian territories, it's not something that we think of very often, if ever, when we talk about the history of our area. But it happened right here. So much so, and it received so much backlash. Joseph Dukes died shortly after losing his bid for principal chief. He's buried across the road also on an unmarked grave. Reverend Edwards is ran out of this country, ran out completely. He ends up moving to California through the duration of the war. Later he returns because in 1866, this church burns, this whole mission burns. It catches fire, and the fire spreads over here and burns the interior of this building. He comes back years later in AIDS, and they rebuilding of it. He wrote that when they rebuilt this building, that within these four walls, there were trees that were 8 inches in diameter. But out of those ashes, they rebuilt this place. And thank God they did. Thank God they did. It goes on to serve as a church for many more years. I want to say when it officially closed, it's come when the Presbyterian Church officially closed. Gene Strickland was the last minister in this church, and I think it was in 93. I don't know if you know. Pretty sure, 99.9% sure it was in 1993. So, for over 100 years after this church is restored in late 1870s, it goes on to serve this community. Touches that many more generations, that many more lives. It becomes, and you know, and everybody has a buy-in for history. But that buy-in is so much cheaper when you can reach out and touch it, when it's a part of your life. And so I could go on and on and on about the people who were tied to this place, about how unique it was, about the Wrights' ministry and their devotion to education and the people that they served. You know, their ministry was unique. Their mission field was unique. And when I say ministry, I don't mean it restricted just to this church. I mean the aiding of their fellow man. The things that they provided outside of this church. The establishment of the system that they helped play into with the education of the people of the Choctaw Nation, which helped put them on a sound foundation for the futuristic world they were going into. They devoted their lives to that. Their mission field consisted of white people, it consisted of native peoples, not just Choctaw, but also Chickasaw. It consisted of African Americans. Alfred Wright gave church services once a month to the enslaved population at the LaFleur House down the road. It was not uncommon. Another example of that is Cyrus Byington in Eagletown from his Stockbridge mission. He rode once every month down to the Tanyan and Janus plantations near present-day Tom, Oklahoma. Those were plantations that were owned by Sophia Pixlin, mother of Choctaw Chief Peter Pixlin, and the Janus plantation being owned by her son-in-law and daughter, Mary and Samuel Garland, and also her daughter Kizzy Poland and her husband John Poland. He wrote down there once a month and delivered church services not only to that family for an hour, but then went out for an hour under the rush hour and held services for the enslaved people of those families. And they were some of the largest slave owners in the Choctaw Nation. It was a common practice for these missionaries. And it is, I should say, as we cover when we talk about the abolitionist movement that came out of this, the bravery of the rights to do that. And the Reverend Edwards later to do that, carry it on. Because Reverend Rice Thomas was a man named Cyrus Kingsbury. Cyrus had came during removal also. He established a mission at Roseville, just down the road, on the other side of Fort Townsend. He and his son also established the first newspaper in the Choctaw Nation. He established a school there called Pine Ridge, Pine Ridge Mission. Later on, they moved to Boggy Depot, opened up a newspaper there, a mission there. He's buried there at Boggy Depot. He was the supervisor for the American Board of Missions in this area at that time, over all these Presbyterian missions that were popular. He was a slave owner and an ardent supporter of slavery. And here he had a congregation that was leading a low-key abolitionist movement. So you can imagine the exchanges and the friction there. And so it's very interesting. So much that comes in and out of these doors. It's amazing. And so, I say all that, and I'll close with this. And I'll take your questions if you have any. If you're not too afraid to ask, afraid I'll go off the rails and rant for another hour. But one of the reasons that this is so special to me to hold this in this place. In many ways, I have akin our areas of history to a gospel. Not the gospel, to be clear. Not the gospel, but to a gospel. It is the responsibility of every one of us. We all own our history. We all own our history. Every one of you own the history that resides in this place. Every single one of you. It transcends the invisible, made-up lines that we put up. It goes over cultural lines. It goes over racial lines. It goes over time. Or any other invisible, man-made time, or line or hindrance that we make up. History is a blanket application that applies to everyone. And the thing I love about history is just like, as a believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ, history for me is also, it's black and white. There's no in between, there's no gray. It happened or it did not. It existed or it did not. There is no gray. And it's so concrete now, I found so much structure and comfort in the pursuit of history. Because it tells you a direction as to who you are, the place that you live, why it is the way it is. It can be a compass of sorts. But you all own it. It's all yours to share. Every one of them. Everybody here. And it's that thing that we should be carrying into the world to tell people who we are, where we come from, why these things are important. Because they're universal human experiences. And so I'm very pleased that you all came out tonight, very pleased that you had such a great turnout. To the staff of Wheelock Academy, again, thank you very much for putting the speaker series on. For those of you who have not been able to join us, Wheelock Academy staff, this is the last installment of the speaker series for March. I believe we're going to have one again in the fall. And they've been great. I've had the privilege of being able to come to every one of them, and it has been fantastic. I have learned something in every single one of them. And I just really appreciate this opportunity to come here and learn, to come here